Evening, everybody. How's it going? It's Comic Crack. I did the video, I don't know, a week ago at this point, where we looked at Promethean, that prozine, Underground Comics, and that 30-page interview with Crumb. I went to Funnyworld, like online, just to kind of see if he had any of the Funnyworld magazines. This is one that he had. What I didn't realize at the time is this is part 2 of the interview, or not interview really, but look at Fritz the Cat, the movie Fritz the Cat. I just finished it, and I thought I'd talk about it because it's a good kind of counterpoint to what we were reading about in the other one, the Crumb interview. Promethean Enterprises. Why am I blanking on the name? Yeah, Promethean Enterprises. That one there. And I thought this was this is a great article. So a couple of things to say just before that. So there's a website, michaelbarrier.com, michaelbarrier.com. And under the About section, he talks about Funnyworld. And there's a link. Let me just see. Capsules Funnyworld Revisited. It's kind of halfway down the page. And you can click on the Revisited link and you can get some articles from the previous issues. And in there, they do have issue number 14, the article about Fritz from issue number 14, as well as some other stuff. So I haven't read 14, part 1. I dove into this one. Just wanted to get a sense of things. I'll go back and kind of read the first one. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit too. Fascinating stuff. And when we get there, we'll talk in a little more detail. So starts out, first of all, an impressive magazine. I have one other issue somewhere in the bins, and I don't think I've ever actually sat and read through it. This is really, really well done. A hell of a writer, clearly talking about stuff that he absolutely loves, puts a lot of time and effort into it. And in his editorial, he talks about wanting to go, does he say quarterly? He wants to go more often, but at this point in time, he's struggling to get it out once a year. He's doing some teaching. He's been approached to write a book on animation from the 30s and 40s, I believe, 20s and 30s, or 30s and 40s. Either way, so he kind of solicits some help from the readers, any articles, any stories, anybody that worked in animation in those times or knows any of the stories or history. So we're looking at fall 1973, I think, in this particular issue. And Mike Barrier is the editor. Goes on to a couple of letters, most notably from Roger Brand, underground cartoonist extraordinaire, who just talks about Mike's coverage of underground comics and how he doesn't get anything out of them. He thinks that they're poorly thought of, especially when he does stuff like comparing, you're having having a write-up on Carl Barks, a long story arc of Carl Barks and the genius of that, and then you're going to S. Clay Wilson, for example, and Crumb short stories, and it's kind of an unfair comparison and kind of missing the mark. He goes as far as kind of calling him prudish. Stop it. Focus on that. There you go. Now focus on that. Sorry, everybody. Just let's see if we can stop that pulsing. Has that done it? I think so. Very strange. So basically is not a fan. And then, of course, Mike replies, and he just talks about that idea of these struggling artists and kind of, cleansing their inner demons and how you're coming to terms with that. And he claims that, that's just not enough. It's actually a very, very well written response, and I can absolutely see where he's coming from. So I'm a fan. I'm a fan of this guy. I will be looking for more of these Funnyworld magazines. Then we get a strip, and the name, I'm blanking on the name, John Fawcett. Some beautiful art, decent enough story, nothing to write home about. We won't spend too much time on that, but some really, really nice pages here, some really beautiful stuff. Like, look at that. It's beautiful. And then we get into some Tex Avery, the Warner years. So I imagine this is a multi-issue story about Tex Avery and how he started and kind of his ideas behind his animation. Tex Avery, one of the classics of really just insane, fast-paced animation. Red Hot Riding Hood being one of his most famous, possibly. Even kind of paid homage to in the Mask movie with Jim Carrey, where he's sitting at the bar and his jaw flies open and hits the table and his eyes come bugging out of his head, right out of a Tex Avery cartoon, talking about working with Chuck Jones and others. Great stuff. Tex is classic. I've got a disc somewhere filled with a bunch of Tex Avery shorts. And then really nice, I wish this was longer. But again, Patrick Rosenkrantz, the writer of this one. Sorry, I'm going to flip this around here for a sec. Patrick Rosenkrantz is the author of a forthcoming history of underground comics. So this is the Berkeley Con, and talking about some of the events that were going on and some of the deals that were being made, and kind of talks about underground comics in a way of, like the black and white explosion, like what happened in the 90s, like possibly what's happening now, depending on who you talk to, just this oversaturation of underground comics at this time, and the veterans who had been writing underground comics for about 5 or 6 years, just kind of their thoughts on it. There's a panel there that Spain Rodriguez is in, talking about chauvinism in the comics. Trina Robbins and others wanted to have a panel talking about sexism in underground comics. Lots of deals being made. So just gives a little snapshot of what it was like. And then some incredible photos, including this one here. An art display included these sculptures by Guy Caldwell of his, oh boy, it's difficult to read upside down, even with my glasses. An art display included these sculptures by Guy Caldwell of his characters for Inner City Romance. Dave Sheridan, Ron Turner, Simon Deitch, Bob Sidebottom Comics dealer, Art Spiegelman and Justin Green, and then Tom Veitch and Greg Irons here, which is fantastic. So I wish this was, I wish there was more here. It was really, really great. I have a little snapshot. So then we get into the filming of Fritz the Cat Part 2. So I guess one of the things I'll say right off the top is I'm a huge fan of Fritz the Cat, the movie. I've talked about Bakshi here before and what a fan I am of his. Again, incredibly well done article and overview. Looking forward to digging into Part 1 to see what he had to say. There's even a page here where Robert Crumb responds to his first article, praising him and kind of corrects him on a few of the details. So we just get a snapshot of what it was like. And I mean, for the most part, it talks about stuff that I'm all too familiar with in kind of the film world and where some of these things kind of happen, right? Not enough time, not enough money, not properly planned. In this case, no real storyboards, no real script. Everything and Bakshi continually just telling people that it's all up here, it's all up in my head. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. All of those usual kind of things that come with this world and is somehow always presented as like a positive. We did it with zero money, zero time, didn't even have a script, and look at this incredible thing that we came up with. It's just that for the most part, 9 times out of 10, that shit goes down the toilet. Sometimes it floats, but sometimes it just gets flushed down. So they talk about just kind of a little bit more about actually where he was coming from and what he wanted to do. Talks a little bit about Robert Crumb early on and his association or lack thereof with it, but mostly about Bakshi and Krantz just trying desperately to kind of get animators in New York is where they started to kind of jump on board, and how they could keep them. He says that Bakshi claims that the reason a lot of time wasn't spent on getting a script and getting storyboards and the like put out is because he just wanted to jump right in and get these guys committed, as is the case with a lot of production and film work and anything artistic. People are going to go where the money probably is right at that moment, right? So he wanted to make sure that they stuck with him and he could kind of rope them in, these artists that he wanted to work with, these animators he wanted to work with. Eventually, kind of through, it seems to be a lot of people kind of getting fired or either quitting. He wants to kind of get in with the California crowd and move the whole studio out there. So it talks a little bit about that. And it also speaks, and again, I'm going to try to kind of take myself out of it a little bit, because this section in here, quite frankly, just really fucking pissed me off. Because they just talk about this idea of the kind of animators and what world they're working in Hollywood. A lot of them were working on kind of TV and commercial and that sort of thing. At that time, the film work that they were doing, the animated work they were doing, might keep them employed for about 4 or 5 months, and that would be it. So the rest of the year they would have off. And unfortunately, they talk about people who just aren't in love with the industry or the art of it anymore, and they're all kind of classic union people. They just sit around and bitch about it, and it's part of me is like, yeah, go fuck yourself. The reason they're sitting and bitching about it is because people like fucking Krantz and fucking Bakshi are coming in without a plan, without any idea of what they want to do, just kind of, and people are just supposed to accept the bare minimum to work on their artistic endeavor. So, I mean, there's a certain level of surliness and that attitude that is going to come from being in this grind, right? Especially if you're dealing things with TV where they don't want anything artistic. So you're put in this kind of world to make a living, because again, it's this idea of art versus commerce, art versus trying to make a living. And when you start kind of heading into one more than the other, that kind of stuff is going to happen. You have to make it worth people's while. You have to kind of treat them and pay them properly, instead of trying to make deals with them and trying to hustle. The one of the biggest things that I get from this, and even from the interviews that I've seen with Bakshi, even most recently on Kayfabe, it feels like that part of the game, that part of the hustle of the film industry is something that potentially he really responds to. It's part of what he maybe enjoys about it, as well as being at a point in his career where he does want to branch out. He does want to get away from Terry Toons and doing that kind of work and kind of find his own voice and do these things. The article stands out to me so well because he really does a fantastic job of taking you through these different ideas, or at least it did for me anyway. The idea of Bakshi wanting to have a voice, the idea of using a character to uh, um, because it feels like part of the story that Bakshi was writing was taking a character that symbolized a movement, taking a character that symbolized a point in time, and kind of using that as a leapfrog for some of his own things. Apparently, he took from 3 different Crumb stories, and off the top of my head, I didn't make the notes. It might be here. Blah, blah, blah. No, it doesn't. I thought it was there. Anyway, three different patchwork film. Bakshi assembled his screenplay from parts of 3 Crumb stories. The opening scenes are taken from the Fritz story in the Head Comics book. The middle of the picture is based on Fritz Bugs Out, with the scenes in Harlem greatly expanded from those in the book. The closing scenes drawn Fritz the No Good. So, talking about taking this character that symbolizes these particular time periods, and arguably from a creator who is very much the voice of the underground and kind of started that off to talk about a bunch of other things that he wanted to talk about. So you do get the sense that Bakshi was this kind, he was very trepidatious and did have things to say, but didn't feel 100% comfortable yet doing his own thing. So there is a little bit of a cushion that you have where it's like, well, I'm dealing with somebody else's character, so there's something to fall back on. It's like, well, yeah, there was some of my ideas, but some of those ideas were from somebody else. So you can kind of separate ownership of it, which I can totally understand, especially if you're breaking out into something new and maybe you don't have the strongest voice. But again, it's this kind of hustler dealing with an artist who's also very standoffish, as we spoke about before. Crumb kind of walking away from any sort of deal, didn't want to sign the paperwork, and his wife signed for him after Bakshi kind of hounded her for 2 days. So he talks a little bit more about the, we'll come back to this. There's a couple of pages here on heavy traffic. He talks about what ultimately didn't work, and that's the biggest part of what he feels didn't work, and a lot of people felt didn't work. The different scenes that just didn't seem to jive into one story. Bakshi claims early on that he didn't also want to tie himself down when he talked about not having a script and not having storyboards. He didn't want to tie himself down to an idea. He wanted the freedom to have these kind of things come. And I'm laughing because I fucking hear that all the goddamn time in all the years that I worked in movies. Tell me how many fucking times I worked with a guy who had goddamn storyboards. I can count them on one fucking hand. It's this idea that the storyboards and that are somehow going to lock down your creativity when it's completely fucking false. They're good roadmaps. Nothing is saying that you have to hit every single point in that. As you're going through the production, if you know basically your structure, you know basically where you want to end up, you can still deviate that. If anything, it just gives you something to make sure that you come back on track. And it's just such a cop-out fucking attitude that I've never bought. There's no way every goddamn person in the world that's making a film or something is a fucking artist. It's just not the way that it is. Not everybody has that in them where they can just fly by the seat of their pants and create something incredible. Not saying it can't happen. Chances are, though, you're not the fucking artist that's going to make it happen. So, so one of the elements that he claims, and he's not the only one, a lot of people have claimed it, there's just too many of these elements that don't work. For me, when I saw the movie, and I've seen it, I don't even know how many times now. I guess the other thing that I should say is I haven't seen it in a long time. I really want to watch it again. It's a movie I don't actually own, so I would love to see it again, because I remember that being something I really, really enjoyed. All of these almost little vignettes, and in fact, taking from 3 different stories that he talks about being a downfall because the character and even Crumb himself was at different stages when he was writing this. I think that idea works really well too, because Fritz really does come through this arc throughout the movie, even though ultimately at the end of the movie he ends up just back where he was. I really think it works, and all of those kind of disparate elements work well together for me, but I would love to see it again. One of the scenes that he talks about that worked really well was the rabbit biker that comes in. There's a scene and just everything just hits the marks. And what's always incredible to me about animation, when you get guys that really dissect and really talk about animation, is when they can isolate scenes to very specific artists. I think it's amazing. And it completely makes sense. Everybody's going to have their own style. And again, one of the things that he claims doesn't work is because there wasn't this overarching outline. You're getting everybody's individual voice all the more so, that it really kind of emphasizes the lack of structure, because you're getting these different artists really giving their own take to what they're being handed. Talks a little bit about, there's some scenes in Harlem in a bar, and Bakshi talks about getting a friend of his, this black friend of his, to go out and wanted to record and get some people, some actual dialogue, try to interact with people in a bar and try to record all that stuff. The guy came back claiming that he wasn't able to, so Bakshi himself goes out to a bar in Harlem with a tape recorder and just starts kind of interacting with people in a bar and getting the bar kind of sounds, which is fantastic to hear, because that's one thing that stands out to me with the movie, is this kind of element of, there's so much in there that feels like it was unscripted. There's so much in there that feels like it was just recorded on the fly surreptitiously and chucked into the movie. And again, it's something that they say they didn't like. It's something that I really responded to, because it gave it a different sense. One of the things that he continually talks about is, after kind of trashing Bakshi in the film for most of it, he does talk about and does acknowledge that it's he finds it a very important animated film, because it has a different voice. It has a kind of an artistic slant to it that you don't normally see. So it is a bit of a turning point. And again, I would say that that's true of just Bakshi himself with this movie. There is this very, yeah, sure, it's muddled, but I do find that it is Bakshi's voice, because a lot of the movies afterwards, they still have that kind of feeling of this, I don't know, not quite scripted dialogue. Seems like a little more raw. I mean, maybe that's not a hard and fast rule over every single one of his movies, but I find the ones that I respond to the most, like Heavy Traffic, like Coonskin, like Fritz the Cat, there is that kind of energy in them that I think is phenomenal. What else does he talk about in here? Talks about the death of this crow and how it was really well done, but just kind of didn't hold back enough. And there's this real sense of Bakshi having these great ideas that just didn't get, it's like he had these great ideas and then didn't have the confidence to follow them through, so then fills it with other things. There's a pool game that's happening, and as the balls are going down into the pockets, there's all these kind of cuts to different things that are happening as this crow is dying. And he says that he wishes it just would have stuck with the pool table and kind of went there, and just had some confidence in what his base idea was. And all of that leads us to this section here. And I think later on too. So there's a couple of different things mixed in here. So this section is Crumb kind of passing on some information, talking about how much he enjoyed the first article, and kind of clearing up some of the information. He claims that he was paid $7,000. More came later on, but initially it was only $7,000. But he also tells a story about going to see a screening of it with like Robert Williams and S. Clay Wilson and a couple of other underground guys, and how nervous Bakshi was and how filled with anxiety, didn't want those other guys to come, and apparently continually said, they're going to hate me. They're going to hate the movie. They're going to think I'm a hack. They're going to think I'm this, that, and the other thing. So, I mean, I really get the sense, and even watching the interview with him on the Kayfabe channel, I mean, he rarely looks up into the camera. I know it's a little bit different when you're doing kind of online stuff. So I kind of wrote some of it off to he's just not comfortable with doing that, period. But this one really does kind of highlight maybe a more of just a guy that doesn't have the most self-confidence, to be honest. And apparently after the screening, he was kind of sitting in the back with Crumb. Bakshi and Crumb were sitting in the back row. All the other underground artists that came, they were sitting somewhere else. They came and just walked right by him, didn't even acknowledge anything. And Crumb kind of talked to him about like how disappointed he was in some of the stuff and how he felt he missed the mark and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, you got to feel for him, you know? So I think this kind of wraps up really nicely for me anyway. What started out with that Bakshi interview on Kayfabe, just kind of getting a sense of who these people are and what kind of things were going on for them and maybe what their personalities were. I mean, the one thing that I would say about all of this stuff when it comes to working with artists is that you're working with artists. You're working with people that are bringing a variety of things to the table. With some of that talent may come some of these other elements that maybe aren't as easy to deal with. And again, none of this is a hard and fast rule, because then you're sometimes dealing with artists that seem to have their shit together and know exactly what they want when they want it and can really pull it off professionally. But it really does feel to me like it's a group of people trying their fucking damnedest, just getting up in the morning, putting their trousers on, going to work and doing the best that they can. Some of them just feel like they like the hustle a little more. We get some Carl Barks too. I'm not skimming by that because I don't think it's any good. It's just that this is the main focus for me, and I haven't read it yet, so I don't really want to speak on it. So overall, fantastic. Really, really great. Yeah. Highly recommended. Like I said, you can read them for free on michaelbarrier.com. If you just kind of hunt around that website, you'll find the links to both of these articles, so you don't have to find the magazine. I just know that I'm going to be looking for more of this Funnyworld. Really, really impressive. Really well written. Seems like an incredibly smart guy. A lot of great ideas, and I loved kind of walking through this whole process, feeling like you're there to some degree. That's it. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you.